The early 1970s marked a revolutionary period in professional hockey. While the National Hockey League had long dominated the sport, a bold new challenger emerged in 1972, the World Hockey Association. Among the 12 original WHA franchises was a team that would quickly capture the hearts of Quebec City, the Quebec Nordiques. The Nordiques were born from the vision of local businessmen, most notably Marcel Aubut, who saw an opportunity to bring professional hockey back to Quebec City. The name Nordiques, meaning Northerners in French, was chosen to reflect the proud French-Canadian identity of the region. Their distinctive blue uniforms featured a stylized igloo forming an N, creating an instantly recognizable brand that resonated with the local population. Quebec City embraced its new team with open arms. The Colisée de Québec, an arena with just over 10,000 seats, became the loud and passionate home of the Nordiques. What made this team special from the beginning was its commitment to French-Canadian hockey talent. While other professional teams had long overlooked French-speaking players, the Nordiques actively recruited them, making the team a source of cultural pride. The early Nordiques teams featured players like Cloutier and Marc Tardif, French-Canadian stars who might not have gotten the same opportunities in the NHL. These players became local heroes, connecting the team deeply to its community. This approach wasn't just culturally significant, it proved successful on the ice as well. Despite being a new franchise, the Nordiques quickly became competitive in the WAA. The team's fortunes rose dramatically with the arrival of Marc Tardif in 1974. Tardif, a former Montreal Canadian, became the face of the franchise and one of the WHA's most dominant scorers. His presence elevated the team to championship contender status. The natural rivalry with the Montreal Canadiens began to simmer during this period, despite the teams playing in different leagues. Quebec City had long lived in the shadow of Montreal, both culturally and in sports. The Nordiques gave the city its own identity in the hockey world, setting the stage for what would become one of hockey's most intense provincial battles. The pinnacle of the Nordiques' WHA era came in the 1976-77 season. Led by Marc Tardif's MVP performance, the team captured the Avco World Trophy, the WHA's championship prize, defeating the Winnipeg Jets in the finals. This championship solidified the Nordiques as more than just a cultural curiosity. They were winners, giving Quebec City its first professional hockey championship. By 1979, the WHA was facing financial difficulties, and talks of a merger with the NHL intensified. When the merger was finally agreed upon, the Quebec Nordiques were among just 4 WHA teams accepted into the NHL alongside the Edmonton Oilers, Winnipeg Jets, and Hartford Whalers. The little team that began as a bold experiment in a rebel league had earned its place among hockey's elite. The Nordiques entered the NHL with their identity firmly established, a proudly French-Canadian team with a championship pedigree and passionate fan base. Yet the challenges of competing in the established NHL would test this young franchise in ways they couldn't have imagined. As the 1970s came to a close, the Nordiques prepared to write the next chapter in their colorful history, now on hockey's biggest stage. The Quebec Nordiques' entry into the National Hockey League in 1979 marked a significant shift for the franchise. No longer playing in a rebel league, the Nordiques now face the established NHL powers on a nightly basis. The transition proved difficult, as the team struggled through its inaugural NHL season, finishing with a disappointing record. The step-up in competition exposed gaps in their roster that needed to be addressed for the team to remain competitive. The NHL draft quickly became the Nordiques' path to improvement. Their poor initial performances gave them favorable draft positions, which they used wisely. In 1981, they selected Michel Goulet, a skilled forward who would become one of the franchise's greatest players. Goulet's smooth skating and natural scoring ability made him an instant fan favorite at the Colisée. He would go on to score over 50 goals 4 times for the Nordiques, establishing himself as one of the premier left wingers in the league. While the draft helped build the team's foundation, the Nordiques made their most significant roster addition through more dramatic means. In 1980, brothers Peter and Anton Stastny defected from communist Czechoslovakia in a daring escape that captured international headlines. Their decision to join the Nordiques transformed the franchise overnight. Peter Stastny, in particular, emerged as one of the NHL's elite players, recording over 100 points in his first 6 seasons with Quebec. The addition of their brother Marion the following year created one of hockey's most dynamic family scoring units. The Stastny brothers brought a European playing style that was still in common in North American hockey. Their creativity, passing precision, and offensive instincts changed how the Nordiques played the game. They helped establish Quebec as a team known for its exciting, high-scoring brand of hockey that contrasted with the more physical style prevalent in the NHL at that time. As the team improved on the ice, its rivalry with the Montreal Canadiens intensified into what became known as the Battle of Quebec. These matchups transcended sport, tapping into deeper cultural and political tensions between Quebec City and Montreal. Games between the two teams were heated affairs that often erupted into bench-clearing brawls, most famously during the 1984 playoffs. The infamous Good Friday Massacre, a playoff game featuring multiple fights, cemented the rivalry as one of the fiercest in hockey history. By the mid-1980s, the Nordiques had built a competitive team around their stars. The 1984-85 season saw them win their division for the first time in the NHL, with Dale Hunter providing grit, Michel Goulet the scoring touch, and Peter Stastny the playmaking. Supported by goaltender Mario Gosselin and defenseman Randy Mahler, the Nordiques established themselves as legitimate Stanley Cup contenders. The team's success during this period reflected its unique identity. While embracing European talent through the Stastnys, they maintained their commitment to Quebec-born players, making them a true provincial team. The Colisée became one of the most difficult arenas for opposing teams to visit, with passionate fans creating an intimidating atmosphere for visitors. By 1987, the Nordiques had completed their transition from WHA upstarts to established NHL force. They had made the playoffs for 6 consecutive seasons and built a team that seemed poised for long-term success. However, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Age was catching up with some key players, and financial realities of operating in the NHL's smallest market were beginning to tighten. While few could see it at the time, the foundation of the franchise was starting to crack beneath the surface of a competitive success. The late 1980s marked a turning point for the Quebec Nordiques as the franchise entered a painful period of decline. After years of playoff appearances in competitive hockey, the team's performance on the ice began to deteriorate. The 1987-88 season saw the Nordiques miss the playoffs for the first time in 7 years, signaling the beginning of a difficult stretch for the organization and its loyal fans. Several factors contributed to this decline. The core players who had led the team during its peak years were aging or departed. Peter Stastny, though still productive, was no longer the dominant force he had been earlier in the decade. Michel Goulet's scoring touch began to fade. The team struggled to replace these talents with new stars, creating gaps in the lineup that proved difficult to fill. Financial challenges also began to mount for the franchise. Quebec City, with its metropolitan population of just over 650,000, was by far the smallest market in the NHL. This limited the team's revenue potential from ticket sales, local television deals, and corporate sponsorships. As player salaries across the league continued to rise throughout the late 1980s, the Nordiques found themselves at a growing disadvantage compared to teams in larger markets. The team's response to these challenges often made matters worse. Unable to compete financially for top free agents, the Nordiques began trading away established stars for prospects and draft picks. In 1990, they traded fan-favorite Michel Goulet to Chicago, a move that symbolized the franchise's declining fortunes. Peter Stastny was dealt to New Jersey in 1990, ending an era in Quebec hockey history. These moves, while perhaps necessary from a business perspective, devastated the team's on-ice performance and eroded fan morale. The results were predictable and painful. The Nordiques finished last in their division for 4 consecutive seasons from 1988 to 1992. The team that had once challenged for the Stanley Cup now routinely found itself at the bottom of the standings. The passionate crowds of the Colisée watched their team struggle night after night, though remarkably, their support never wavered completely. Perhaps no situation better exemplified the Nordiques' troubles during this period than the Eric Lindros saga. Possessing the first overall pick in the 1991 NHL entry draft, the Nordiques selected Lindros, a player widely regarded as a generational talent. However, Lindros had made it clear before the draft that he would not play for Quebec, citing the language barrier and limited marketing opportunities in the small Canadian market. Despite selecting him, the Nordiques found themselves in a standoff with their top prospect, who refused to wear the team's jersey on draft day. The Lindros situation dragged on for an entire year, becoming an embarrassing spectacle for the franchise. The Canadian dollar's weakness against the American dollar created additional financial strain, as the team earned revenue in Canadian dollars but paid players' salaries in American currency. 1992 for a package that included players, draft picks, and cash. While the trade would later be recognized as one that brought valuable assets to Quebec, At the time, it represented another humiliation for a once proud franchise. Behind the scenes, ownership challenges compounded the team's problems. Marcel Aubut, the team's president and part owner, struggled to find local investors willing to increase their financial commitment to the team. The economic recession of the early 1990s hit Quebec particularly hard, further limiting potential local ownership options. By 1992, the Nordiques had become a cautionary tale in the NHL, a small market team unable to compete in the league's evolving economic landscape. Their on-ice performance reflected these harsh realities, with the team finishing the 1991-92 season with just 52 points, the second worst record in the league. 5 years removed from division championships and playoff success, the Quebec Nordiques had hit rock bottom, leaving many to wonder if the franchise could survive in Quebec City. Despite the dark period that had engulfed the Quebec Nordiques, a new chapter began to unfold in the early 1990s. The years of finishing at the bottom of the standings had given the team something valuable: high draft picks. These selections would form the foundation of an unexpected renaissance for the struggling franchise. The Nordique scouting department, despite the organization's financial limitations, had done remarkable work identifying young talent that would soon change the team's fortunes. The cornerstone of this rebuild had actually arrived years earlier. Joe Sakic, selected 15th overall in the 1987 draft, had developed into one of hockey's premier centers. Quiet and unassuming off the ice, Sakic led by example with his consistent play and lethal wrist shot. By the early 1990s, he had established himself as the team's captain and undisputed leader. While the team around him struggled, Sakic's individual brilliance gave fans a reason to keep coming to the Colisée. The 1989 draft brought Matt Sundin to Quebec, as the Nordiques made history by selecting the Swedish center first overall, the first European player ever chosen with the top pick. Sundin's size, skill, and skating ability made him an ideal building block for the franchise's future. In 1990, the team added power forward Owen Nolan with the first overall selection. These high draft picks, along with the assets acquired in the Eric Lindros trade, gradually assembled a roster filled with young, promising talent. The Lindros trade, in particular, proved to be a turning point for the franchise. In exchange for rights to Lindros, the Nordiques received a package that included players Peter Forsberg, Mike Ricci, and Ron Hextall, along with draft picks, prospects, and $15 million in cash. Forsberg, a skilled Swedish center, would prove to be the most valuable piece of the return, though he remained in Sweden during the 1992-93 season. The 1992-93 campaign showed the first signs of improvement. Led by Sakic and Sundin, the Nordiques improved their point total from 52 to 83, narrowly missing the playoffs but showing promising development. The following season, 1993-94, marked the team's true breakthrough, with rookie goaltender Stefan Fiset providing stability in net and the young core gaining experience. The Nordiques returned to the playoffs for the first time in 6 years, recording 76 points in a lockout-shortened 48-game season. The shortened 1994-95 season following the lockout witnessed the full emergence of the Nordiques as a force in the NHL once again. Peter Forsberg finally joined the team, winning the Calder Trophy as Rookie of the Year with 50 points in 47 games. His arrival completed a remarkable collection of young talent that few teams in the league could match. The Nordiques won their division with a 30-13-5 record, sending a message that the years of rebuilding had produced a legitimate contender. The team's style of play had evolved from the high-flying European-influenced approach of the Stastny era. The new Nordiques combined skill with North American physicality, creating a more balanced attack that could compete with any team in the league. Coach Marc Crawford, himself a young and innovative mind behind the bench, embraced an aggressive forechecking system that maximized his team's speed and skill. Fan excitement returned to levels not seen since the mid-1980s. The Colisée was once again filled with passionate supporters who sensed that something special was brewing. Local media coverage intensified, and the iconic blue jerseys became a common sight throughout Quebec City. After years of disappointment, pride in the Nordiques had been restored to the promise of this young, talented team. What made this resurgence particularly poignant was that it came alongside dramatic improvements in the team's historical rivals, the Montreal Canadiens, who won the Stanley Cup in 1993. The prospect of renewed Battle of Quebec playoff matchups tantalized hockey fans across the province. The stage seemed set for a new golden era of Quebec hockey, with the Nordiques positioned for sustained success after years in the wilderness. Yet even as the team flourished on the ice, troubling questions remain about its long-term viability in Quebec City. The fundamental economic challenges that had plagued the franchise had not disappeared. In fact, they had worsened. As the Nordiques prepared for what promised to be an exciting playoff run in the spring of 1995, few fans could have imagined that they were witnessing the final games of their beloved team in Quebec. The spring of 1995 should have been a time of celebration for Quebec Nordiques fans. Their team had captured the Northeast Division title with a stellar 30-13-5 record in a lockout-shortened season. Young stars like Joe Sakic, Peter Forsberg, and Owen Nolan had developed into one of the NHL's most formidable lineups. After years of rebuilding and patience, the hockey future in Quebec City appeared brighter than ever. Yet behind this on-ice success, a perfect storm of financial and political challenges was reaching its climax. The fundamental problem remained the size of the Quebec City market. With a metropolitan population significantly smaller than any other NHL city, the Nordiques face inherent limitations on ticket revenue, local broadcast rights, and corporate sponsorships. These disadvantages had always existed, but two factors made them increasingly unsustainable in the mid-1990s NHL landscape. First, player salaries across the league were rising dramatically. The NHL was transitioning from an era where most owners could operate profitably to one where financial losses became common, particularly in smaller markets. For the Nordiques, this meant widening annual deficits despite improved attendance and performance. Marcel Aubut, the team's president and part owner, reported losses of $10 million for the 1994-95 season, an unsustainable figure for the ownership group. Second, the Canadian dollar had weakened considerably against its American counterpart. By 1995, it was worth approximately 75 cents US. This created a severe competitive disadvantage for Canadian teams, who collected revenue in Canadian dollars but paid player salaries in American currency. This currency penalty effectively increased the Nordiques' cost by 25% compared to American teams, a devastating blow for a franchise already operating on tight margins. The Colisée de Québec represented another significant challenge. Built in 1949, the arena was among the NHL's oldest and smallest facilities, seating just 15,399 fans. More critically, it lacked the luxury boxes and premium seating that had become essential revenue generators for modern sports franchises. While other NHL teams were building new arenas with these profitable amenities, the Nordiques were trapped in an outdated facility that limited their earning potential. Negotiations for a new publicly funded arena had begun years earlier but reached a critical phase in early 1995. The provincial government, led by Premier Jacques Parizeau, had initially proposed a financial package to help build a new facility. However, the political climate in Quebec was complicated by the upcoming independence referendum, and public support for using taxpayer funds to subsidize professional sports was mixed at best. When the government's final offer fell short of what the Nordiques ownership group felt was necessary, arena negotiations collapsed in April 1995. With no solution to the arena problem and mounting financial losses, Aubut and his partners faced a difficult decision. Interest from potential buyers in Quebec was limited, given the economic challenges. Meanwhile, several American cities were actively courting NHL franchises, offering modern arenas in more favorable economic conditions. The combination of market size limitations, currency disadvantages, and the failed arena deal left the ownership with few viable options to keep the team in Quebec. On May 16, 1995, the announcement that Quebec hockey fans had long feared finally came. The Nordiques had been sold to Comsat Entertainment Group, which planned to relocate the team to Denver, Colorado. The sale price of $75 million reflected both the value of the team's young roster and the more favorable economic conditions in Denver, which offered a larger market and a modern arena already built for the NBA's Denver Nuggets. The public reaction in Quebec was one of heartbreak and anger. Fans organized rallies and protests, with thousands taking to the streets to express their disappointment. Local businesses displayed signs of mourning, and radio stations played funeral dirges. The provincial government faced criticism for not doing more to save the team, while others pointed fingers at the NHL's economic structure that seemed to favor American markets over smaller Canadian cities. For the players who had created such excitement during the 1994-95 season, the news was bittersweet. While many expressed sadness at leaving their passionate Quebec fans, the move to a larger market with better facilities offered professional advantages. The team's core would remain intact in the move to Colorado, but the iconic blue jerseys with the fleur-de-lis and the Nordic identity would be left behind. The final games of the Colisée took place during the 1995 playoffs, where the Nordiques were upset in the first round by the New York Rangers. No one in the building that night knew they were witnessing the end of an era. There would be no proper goodbye, no ceremonial final game. The team that had been born in the Rebel WJ had risen to challenge the NHL's best, fallen to the league's depths, and then risen again on the strength of young stars, departed Quebec City with little fanfare but much sorrow. A hockey institution that had become woven into the cultural fabric of Quebec was gone after 23 years, leaving behind a passionate fan base and the question of what might have been. As moving trucks packed up the team's equipment for the journey to Denver, they carried with them not just hockey gear, but the dreams of province that had embraced the Nordiques as a symbol of their distinct identity in the hockey world. The pain of losing the Nordiques was only magnified by what happened next. The team that had departed Quebec City, taking with it the hopes and dreams of a hockey-mad community, underwent a dramatic transformation. Rebranded as a Colorado Avalanche, the franchise retained the core of young stars built during those final years in Quebec. Joe Sakic, Peter Forsberg, and many others simply changed uniforms, trading Nordiques blue for Avalanche burgundy and blue. What followed in Denver was nothing short of remarkable. In their very first season after relocation, the Avalanche captured the Stanley Cup, defeating the Florida Panthers in a 4-game sweep in the 1996 finals. The hockey gods seemed to have a cruel sense of irony. The championship that Quebec fans had waited decades for came immediately after the team's departure. For Nordique supporters watching from afar, the victory was bittersweet. While many maintained allegiance to the players they had cheered for in Quebec, the sight of the Stanley Cup being raised in Denver instead of Quebec City was a painful reminder of what had been lost. The success didn't end with that first championship. The transplanted team became a powerhouse in their new home, regularly competing for the Stanley Cup throughout the late 1990s. The 2000 to 2001 season brought a second championship as the Avalanche defeated the New Jersey Devils, with a roster still featuring several former Nordiques, including Sakic and Forsberg. The franchise that couldn't survive financially in Quebec had become one of the NHL's model organizations in Colorado, making matters more painful for Quebec hockey fans. Several players who had been drafted by the Nordiques developed into Hall of Fame caliber stars. Joe Sakic became the face of the Avalanche franchise, eventually retiring with his number raised to the rafters in Denver. Peter Forsberg emerged as one of the most complete players of his generation, combining skill and physicality in a way few could match. These players, drafted and developed by the Nordiques organization, became legends in another city, representing a hockey legacy that had been built in Quebec but flourished elsewhere. Back in Quebec City, the economic impact of losing the team was significant. Beyond the emotional loss, local businesses that had depended on game day traffic suffered. Hotels, restaurants, and shops near the Colisée saw sharp declines in revenue. The provincial identity took a hit as well. Quebec had lost its second NHL team, leaving only the Montreal Canadiens to represent the province in the World Premier Hockey League. The political fallout was equally notable. The Nordiques' departure came just months before Quebec's independence referendum in October 1995, which was defeated by the narrowest of margins. While it would be an overstatement to suggest that losing the hockey team influenced the vote directly, the timing contributed to a period of soul-searching about Quebec's place in Canada and its economic future. Despite the loss, efforts to bring NHL hockey back to Quebec City began almost immediately. Various groups of investors explored possibilities for attracting a new franchise or relocating an existing team. These efforts gained momentum in the early 2000s as the Canadian dollar began to strengthen and the NHL's economic landscape evolved. The passionate fan base remained intact, with Nordiques jerseys still a common sight around the city years after the team's departure. In a grand gesture that demonstrated the community's ongoing commitment to professional hockey, Quebec City broke ground on a new arena in 2012. The Videotron Centre, a modern 18,000-seat facility, was built at a cost of over $370 million with the explicit purpose of attracting an NHL team back to the city. It stood as a monument to what might have been. Had such a facility existed in 1995, the Nordiques might never have left. Yet despite having addressed the arena issue that contributed to the team's departure, Quebec City's bid for an expansion team was passed over when the NHL added Las Vegas in 2016 in Seattle. The league's focus on American markets with larger television audiences and corporate bases suggested that the fundamental challenges that led to the Nordiques' departure remain relevant decades later. Throughout these years, the Colorado Avalanche continued to honor their Quebec roots in subtle ways. The fleur-de-lis, a symbol from the Nordiques uniforms representing Quebec's French heritage, found its way onto the Avalanche's alternate jerseys. Former Nordiques were welcomed back for ceremonial events, acknowledging the franchise's Canadian origins. But these gestures did little to fill the void left in Quebec City. The story of the Nordiques became a cautionary tale about the business of professional sports, where passion and tradition often take a backseat to economic realities. The team that could have become a dynasty in Quebec instead achieved that status in Colorado, leaving behind a legacy of what might have been a championship parade through the streets of Quebec City, the Stanley Cup race for the fans who had supported the team through its darkest days, and a hockey tradition continuing in the place where it had meant so much to so many. Nearly 3 decades have passed since the Quebec Nordiques played their final game, yet their legacy remains powerfully alive in Quebec and throughout the hockey world. The iconic blue jerseys with the stylized igloo logo continue to be among the most popular retro hockey merchandise, worn proudly not just by those who remember the team firsthand, but by younger generations who know the Nordiques only through stories and highlights. This enduring popularity speaks to something special about the franchise, a unique identity that transcended the typical connection between a sports team and its city. The Nordiques represented more than just hockey in Quebec. They embodied a cultural statement, a declaration that French-Canadian hockey had its own distinct place in the sports landscape. In a province where language and cultural identity have always been central to politics and daily life, the Nordiques stood as a symbol of Quebec's uniqueness. They were not just Quebec City's team, but a reflection of Quebecois identity itself, which helps explain why their loss was felt so deeply and why their memory remains so vivid. The Nordiques fan base has shown remarkable loyalty despite the passage of time. Nordiques Nation, as the organized fan movement came to be known, has remained active long after the team's departure. They have traveled to NHL games in other cities, wearing Nordiques colors and chanting for the team's return. These demonstrations have kept the memory of the team alive and reminded the hockey world that Quebec City still hungers for its team's return. The Videotron Centre stands as the most tangible symbol of this ongoing passion. Completed in 2015 at a cost of over $370 million, the modern arena was built specifically to meet NHL standards and attract a franchise back to Quebec City. It currently hosts the Quebec Remparts of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League and occasional NHL preseason games. But the building's 18,000 seats for hockey were designed with the express purpose of housing a return or expanded NHL franchise. Its very existence represents both hope for the future and a painful reminder what came too late to save the original team. When the NHL has expanded or teams have considered relocation in the years since the Nordiques' departure, Quebec City has consistently been mentioned as a potential destination. The league awarded franchises to Las Vegas, Seattle, and earlier to markets like Nashville and Columbus, but Quebec's bid has remained unfulfilled. NHL officials have cited concerns about conference balance, market size, and the Canadian dollar's fluctuations, but many believe these are merely convenient excuses for favoring larger American television markets. Despite these setbacks, the quest to bring the NHL back to Quebec City continues. Various ownership groups have expressed interest, and political leaders have made the cause part of their platforms. The provincial government remains involved in discussions about potential subsidies or tax benefits that might make a franchise more viable. For many Quebecois, restoring NHL hockey to Quebec City has become something of a mission, a matter of cultural pride and historical justice. Within the current NHL, the Nordiques' influence remains visible in unexpected ways. Many players who got their start in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League speak fondly of watching Nordiques games as children and being inspired to pursue hockey careers. The team's innovative approach to embracing European talent, particularly through the Stastny brothers, helped pave the way for the global game that exists today. Even their bitter rivalry with Montreal established a template for the kind of intense provincial or state rivalries that the NHL has tried to nurture elsewhere. In Colorado, the franchise that was once the Nordiques has maintained connections to its roots. Beyond the fleur-de-lis on alternate jerseys, the organization has occasionally recognized its Quebec heritage during anniversary celebrations. Former Nordiques players have been invited back for ceremonial events, and the franchise's record books still include achievements from the Quebec era. These gestures, while appreciated by some, serve as bittersweet reminders for Quebec fans of what was taken from them. The story of the Quebec Nordiques ultimately transcends hockey, touching on themes of cultural identity, economic forces, political decisions, and a complex relationship between sports teams and the communities that support them. It raises questions about what professional sports owe to their fans, and whether the business of hockey has lost something essential in prioritizing market size and corporate support over passion and tradition. For those who packed the Colisée throughout the 1970s and 1980s, who witnessed the brilliance of the Stastny brothers, who suffered through the dark years of the early 1990s, and who briefly tasted the promise of what might have been with Sakic, Forsberg, and the young core, the Nordiques remain an indelible part of their personal histories. The team may be gone, its games consigned to highlight reels and memories, but the blue jerseys still appear throughout Quebec City on game days, a ghost of hockey past that refuses to fade away. In the ever-changing landscape of professional sports, few lost franchises have maintained such a hold on the collective imagination. The Quebec Nordiques exist now as both a cautionary tale and inspiration, a reminder of how fragile a sports institution can be and how deeply a team can embed itself in a community's soul. Their legacy is not the championships they might have won in Quebec, but the enduring passion they inspired, a flame that decades later shows no signs of being extinguished.